welcome everybody to another Prison and Probation Research Hub digital event on this cold December morning. I have the greatest of pleasure of welcoming two peers, Nicola Collett and Justin Williams. Nicola is from University and is a lecturer in criminology, and she's undertaking her PhD. Justin Williams is from the University of Brighton, and he's also undertaking his PhD. I had the pleasure of meeting them both, and we discussed their work and how their work eclipsed. And it was a wonderful conversation that I had, and I thought we needed to get these guys onto our listings. And today we'll be exploring together criminal records and life chances. And as you all know, this season's events are focusing on hope and the impact that hope, or the lack of it, has on people who are in the criminal justice system, but also working within the criminal justice system. And Nicola and Justin have put together a presentation each. Nicola will go first, followed by Justin, and we'll take your questions. So please put your comments and questions for a Q&A session after they've both presented. And we'll have a discussion together with that. In terms of looking at hope, the question that I think we're wanting to explore is to look at hope, and can it be facilitated with people with criminal convictions? So I have the greatest of pleasures of welcoming both of you. Hello, are you there?
Hi.
Hello, Nicola. Hello, Justin. Thank you for joining us today. Nicola's going to go first. So, Nicola, whenever you're ready, I know you've got some slides for us today, and Justin and I will disappear. And I look forward to hearing what you've got to say about your research. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to wait for the slides to appear. So as Vic has already introduced, my name is Nicola and I'm a lecturer at University. I'm coming to the end of my PhD research, which is a very exploratory piece. It's a narrative inquiry into the experiences of those living in England and Wales with a criminal record. And my PhD research isn't just based on people who have been incarcerated. A lot of the literature around criminal records focuses very much on people who are leaving prison, with it kind of being believed that these are the individuals who perhaps have the most significant barriers to face. But my research looks at the lesser explored experiences. So those people who perhaps have got cautions, non-custodial sentences, and how their criminal record has affected them across the life course. So when, as Vic said, Justin, Vic and I all kind of had a conversation, and we were talking about this idea of hope. And I kind of thought, well, what do I have to say about hope? Because it wasn't something that I'd specifically focused on for the PhD. But then I started thinking about, well, okay, if we're going to talk about hope, what do we actually mean by hope? And how can we facilitate it for people with criminal records without it being a further burden placed on them? So that's what I'm going to talk about today in this slide. And yeah, I welcome you to treat this as very much a kind of coffee seminar type session where Justin and I are just thinking out loud and sharing our thoughts with you. So a little bit of kind of technical information, I suppose, to start with. On the screen here, you can see a very basic table just showing the disclosure of criminal record information in England and Wales via the DBS. So Data Bar in Scotland is the institution, I suppose, that's responsible for criminal record dissemination outside of the criminal justice system. Just a note on that really is the DBS considers itself an administrative actor. which means that they have very little responsibility or accountability for how this information is actually used. That's down to the registered body or the umbrella body, so normally the employer, perhaps, who is requesting that information. So on this table, you can see we've got basic, standard, and enhanced DBS checks. So hopefully you'll all be familiar with those terms. And this table just shows what kind of information might be disclosed on those checks. So basic discloses the least amount of information. So that from the police national computer, so you can see there I've put PNC data, so your recordable offences, and those which are unspent. And I'm going to get onto that in just a second. Standard shows a little bit more, so it shows the police national computer data, spent and unspent, and enhanced shows the most. So the key difference here is that it shows information from the police national database as well. So that's your soft data around things like perhaps acquittals, arrests with no further action. Now, to ensure that we're not allowing information to be kind of put out there in ways that are disproportionate or unlawful, we have the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act and the filtering rules, both of which have gone through changes recently. And again, I'm just mentioning this very briefly to give you some background context of the legislation. But you can see from this table that those who have been in prison for 4 or more years will never have their criminal records spent, which means it will always be disclosed on basic, standard, and enhanced. And you can see then you've got those different rehabilitation periods, with the idea being the longer you're in prison, the longer it takes for your sentence to become spent, so the longer it will be disclosed for. And the filtering is just another mechanism to try to ensure that those historical convictions and cautions are not released on a DBS. But the problem with this is that the vast majority of DBS checks that are given, so in 2018, I think the number was 75% of those were enhanced, which means, as I said, the vast majority of DBS certificates that are requested and disseminated are showing the more information. So why is this a problem then? Because you might think, well, we've got rehabilitation of offenders, we've got filtering, this is ensuring that only relevant and recent information is being disclosed on perhaps the more serious of offences or offenders. But we have a kind of field of research, which Justin and I are both part of, called the Collateral Consequences of Criminal Record. And we have a working group, so that's a part of the European Society of Criminology. And as I said, Justin and I are both part of this group. And it's an emerging field of research that's trying to demonstrate how actually, having attained a criminal record, an individual can then be subject to a wide range of consequences that go far beyond their initial sentence. So I've kind of superficially, I suppose, separated this into structural barriers and stigma and identity, but of course they're overlapping. But I'm just going to go through a few of them just to, again, give you some more information about, well, how might a criminal record affect any one person? So starting with employment then, this is perhaps one of the more researched and widely known structural barrier for people with convictions. A House of Commons survey in 2016, it was by YouGov, said that 50% of employers who took part would not employ somebody with a conviction. 40% of those said it was because they believed it would damage the reputation of the company or the organisation. And 45% said they believed that the individual with a criminal record would be unreliable. A more recent survey, so conducted by Working Chance, that was released very, very recently, noted that things were changing slightly. So they did a survey in 2022 that was kind of 10 years on from their last one. And they find that in the last 10 years, almost twice as many employers are saying that actually they would employ somebody with a criminal record. So things are changing a little bit, but they also found that 30% of those who took part in the survey said that they would automatically reject somebody with a criminal record, even though of them, only 15% had it within their kind of company policy that they had to. So you could see then that even when employers don't have to say no to somebody on the basis of a criminal record, there's still quite an alarming number who will say no because of that. Higher education is another structural barrier. There's a PhD student, Charlotte Brooks, at University of Nottingham, who's doing some really good research on this at the moment, because it's one of the kind of lesser explored areas. So we know that universities do still ask. UCAS did take the tick box off their application recently, but universities are still asking, and I know from myself personally, at re-enrollment stages, you're asked every year to declare whether you have any new convictions or not. So Charlotte's looking into what kind of decisions are made and how admissions are using this data. So much needed research, and she does have a blog that she contributes to, so do look at that if you're interested. And Caroline Bold is also looking at social work. So I'm just name dropping a few people from the working group, really. And she's looking at how the criminal record is used as a signifier or not, perhaps, of suitability. And if you're stopping people from taking part in social work education, then obviously that's going to have a knock-on effect to employment. Travel and immigration, so that's things like applying for a visa or perhaps leave to remain. And without getting too political here, with kind of hostile immigration policies, there's lots of questions to be asked about how this information is going to be used. The more we are trying to restrict immigration. Insurance, so home, car insurance, higher insurance premiums, housing, people with criminal records not being able to kind of go through private letting. I've got Airbnb and dog walking here with a kind of question mark next to them, because these are things that I've just heard people talk about, going on to try to book somewhere through Airbnb and being asked about if they have any criminal convictions. And there's lots of apps now, so you can kind of borrow somebody's dog for an afternoon or take them for walks, and people are finding that actually their criminal records are being asked for as part of that process, which is quite interesting. And because of all these structural barriers, what we're seeing is that people are being denied full citizenship. So there's some work here by Andrew Henley and Abby Stark on this, talking about when people are having their kind of engagement with all these different structural and necessary parts of life being restricted and limited, they're no longer having access to full citizenship. They're kind of experiencing a lesser range of rights, perhaps, than those who do not have criminal records. So just moving on briefly then to stigma and identity. So as I said at the start, my PhD is all about narratives. So how do people actually talk about their experiences and make sense of their experiences with a criminal record? And I found a lot of people were talking about how they don't feel like a criminal. They don't feel like this word criminal, this stereotype, this image that we all have when we hear that word. But their criminal record tells them they are. So how do they make sense of their identity when they do not feel criminal? Remember, as I said, my research isn't about people who have been in prison. It's about people living with criminal records for far less serious offences. And they say, well, I'm not a criminal, but I have this criminal record, this label of a criminal identity, and how do I reconcile that? We also then know that certain groups have got multiple layers of stigma. So I've just put here gender, ethnicity, and substances, although these aren't the only different kind of compounding layers of stigma. So to take gender, for example, we know that a high percentage of women who do offend have had prior experiences of victimization. And there's an argument that says that kind of criminology has paid attention to this for years, that women who offend face greater stigma than their male counterparts, even for the same offences. So this being because they've breached the norms of femininity. So not only have they got the stigma of having offended, they've got the stigma of having breached that norm of femininity, perhaps particularly for sexual or violent offences. And then also stigma relating to their victimization as well. Ethnicity as well has been discussed as that double burden of stigma. And I know that in my research, a couple of people who I spoke to said to me, well, I don't know whether I was discriminated against because of my ethnicity or because of my criminal record. I don't know which it was. And substances. So those individuals whose offending is related to drug and alcohol abuse and misuse. Again, further layers of stigma there. And then finally, this kind of links with denial of citizenship as well. So victim compensation. So in the UK, you can claim for victim compensation if you have become victim to crime. And Bradford Clark et al. Wrote this year about people with convictions being denied access to that. The impact of that going way beyond this lack of monetary compensation for what had happened to them, but actually denial of victim status and being told that because you've got this offence, even if it is historical or minor in some cases, you cannot be considered a full victim and therefore not get the compensation. So Corder and Lagerson wrote then that the current state of affairs of criminal record systems resembles more a disorganised consumer-based digital web of haphazard effects that do not neatly map onto information nor punishment functions. So it is a pretty big issue for people living with criminal records. So then what I did, and this is, again, it was a very kind of unsophisticated Control F search of my participant transcripts here. I then thought, well, okay, how does all of this that I just spoke about, how does that map on to hope and this idea of hope and what it is? And so, as I said, very unsophisticated Control F search of my participant transcripts, and I found these 4 quotes. And what was interesting is they were each telling me different things. So they were all talking about hope and using the word hope, but in different ways. So to start with Paul then, so Paul was in his early 20s and he'd just been rejected from the police force. He was coming towards the end of his criminology degree and he was left going, well, the police don't want me, so now I need to find someone who will and where I can use my past experience and my criminology degree. And he said, I mean, hopefully probation is different. Hopefully they actually recognise the value of interactions with the police from both sides. I'd hope that their ethos would back up my claims a bit, you know. You want people to change, so, you know, here I am. I've changed. Give me a job. Like I say, there's nothing I can do at the moment. I just need to apply for jobs and hope that half of them don't care about it and go from there, really. I've just got to hope it doesn't prevent me from doing what I want too badly. So this was a young person who was still hopeful that, okay, I've had one rejection, but I might not get rejected next time. I might be able to find my niche, find my fit where I can use my past for good. But what I found really interesting in the second half of the quote, he says, I hope it doesn't prevent me from doing what I want too badly. So it's this kind of limited hope. It's not that I hope I can have full access to all these opportunities if I did, like I would if I didn't have a criminal record, but I just hope that barrier isn't too low, isn't too limiting. I then spoke to somebody who I've named Yasmin. These are all fake names, obviously, and she had just been she'd been volunteering with an organisation, and after I think it was about 6 months, they finally processed her DBS check, and it came back with a conviction for neglect, and that was one of several convictions that she had. And this was her talking about how she felt when she was essentially kicked out of this volunteer group. And she said, I never thought I'd be able to get these opportunities with my record, you know, with that thing on my record. So this is the caution for neglect that she's talking about. And obviously the volunteer placement completely dashed my hopes. I thought I'll never be able to get on anywhere. So Yasmin was telling me that when she was knocked back, it completely dashed her hopes. It made her think that she won't be able to get onto anything or anywhere. Rachel was applying for a visa, so she wanted to take her daughter to Disneyland, and she said here, she said, I spent ages like trolling the forums, like seeing who else had done it and who else had managed to get in. But I was finding that there were these people who were like 50 years old who had got like a minor possession charge and not been able to get in. And I thought, well, there's absolutely no hope for me then. So again, Rachel was telling us something a bit different, that her hope, her ability to hope, I suppose, was not necessarily based on her experiences, but actually somebody else's. So again, that was just something that I found that was quite interesting, a different insight to what hope might be for people with convictions. And then finally, we have Ben. So Ben had struggled with alcohol addiction, and a lot of his offending was linked to that. But he then started volunteering with a charity that also worked with former offenders. And he said, I understand where they're coming from. I've got that empathy. I can show compassion towards them. And ultimately, I know sometimes it's just a case of sticking with them, sticking with that person so they can build up their self-esteem, or they have the confidence to go out and do things. It's also for them to relate to me and to have hope or faith in themselves to go on and break the cycle that they're in. So again, just a different perspective here, that Ben was telling me that actually he could instill hope for other people, because he'd been somebody who, as I said, had struggled with alcohol addiction and had a past conviction, but he's now in a good place, and so he could be hope for other people. So 4 very different takes on hope here, I found. So then I started thinking, and this is my final slide, how can we then facilitate hope with people with convictions? Because it's coming up in transcripts. And I went back to think, well, what do we mean by hope? Because I was quite, what's the word? When we started, when Vic, Justin and I started talking about hope, I think I instantly got a little bit maybe wary perhaps of, well, are we telling people who are facing very significant structural barriers and significant stigma to be hopeful? And is that perhaps a bit infantilizing and actually a bit insensitive and just not really appropriate, given that these barriers that they're facing are very real and very significant for people? So I was really careful to go away and think, well, what do I actually mean by hope if I'm going to speak on it? And I found these quotes. So hope is fueled by the perception of successful agency-related goals, the perceived ability of successful pathways-related goals. So it's autonomy, it's control and choice. It's crucial for human striving, and importantly, coping with present circumstances. And that made me think, well, actually, if we're going to think about hope as agency, as somebody believing that actually they do have autonomy, control, and choice, then actually this probably is very, very relevant for people with convictions and something that we should be looking into. But as I've said, that's not by encouraging people with convictions to be more hopeful, but rather ensuring that these pathways are accessible and that people actually can exercise autonomy, control, and choice. So I suppose for me then, as kind of like a final note before I pass over to Justin, is when I'm thinking about hope, I think the avenues for that are through policy change. So perhaps changing rehabilitation of offenders and filtering, so perhaps reducing those spent times, perhaps looking at the criminal record regime in general. So is it that we need to take on a completely different approach? One such approach could be like they do in the Netherlands, so with certificates of conduct. Not that that's a perfect system, but that's a system where somebody will either present a certificate of conduct or not that says that they are suitable for that particular job role. They don't actually disclose whether they have a conviction or not to their employer or what that conviction is. It's just simply, yes, I am suitable, or no, I'm not for that role. Very brief explanation there. Or perhaps from the lens of gatekeepers and encouraging non-discriminatory practice. So we know that UCAS doesn't ask anymore, but what happens at admissions levels at universities? Are they kind of are they using non-discriminatory practice, or are they actually excluding people with convictions with no need to do so? Employers, I know that Justin was at an event recently. I'm not sure whether he plans to talk about that or not, but I know that Justin was at an event recently with Timpson's, and how can employers actively recruit people with convictions, and as I said, universities. So yeah, I think for me, hope is very much a relevant concept, I suppose, to be thinking about for people with criminal records, but it needs to be done carefully as to not place further burdens on people with convictions. It needs to be about access to pathways and facilitating that agency, autonomy, control, and choice. Okay, thank you very much. And please do ask any questions at the end if you think of any, but I will now pass over to Justin, who's going to talk a little bit more about the employment side of things.
Thank you, Nicola. That was great. There's quite a lot of overlap, actually, which hopefully some of what I've got to say will address some of the points that you touched on. First of all, I'm Justin Williams. I'm in my final year of my PhD at the University of Brighton. A little bit of history. I used to teach barbering in prisons, and while I was working in prisons, I did a BA, which led to a master's, and that master's I was interested in what stopped some people coming back to prison, because I did see a lot of people in the revolving door just returning, even though I was training them with a skill to get a job afterwards and not have to come back. The three key things to prevent people coming back to prison, recidivism, are accommodation at first, and of some sort of familial or social support, and finally employment. So that led me to wanting to know how employment works and stops people going back to prison, and how difficult is it for people who've got a criminal record to find and maintain employment. So my research is looking at what employers can do to promote and support resilience in people with convictions in the workplace. And as Nicola said, not just people that have been in prison, but depending on the role, if you have to have an enhanced DBS check, everything that you've ever done, every caution will come up, and a lot of employers do still use that as a filtering process. Many will filter at the application stage when you have ticked that box saying that you have a criminal conviction. They've got no idea what that is, when it was, what the context is. They will just automatically remove that. And in referring to the Working Chance document 2022, that said 45% of employers are more likely to, or have said that they would be more inclined to, but it's not yet showing itself in actual employment rates. It's just people's mindsets are changing, which is good. So part of wanting to get this right is I have recruited a team of people with convictions to co-produce or co-analyze the data with me. The reason I chose to do that was because I don't have criminal convictions and I've not had to go through that process myself. So I wanted to have their lived experience to guide the analysis of the data. So I'd like to share some of the findings. I'm at the findings stage at the moment. I've not yet done the full analysis and discussion, but there are things that are coming through that are quite prevalent. And I've got some quotes in here. I've only used quotes from one of my participants. The people I interviewed were employers of people with convictions. Of the 22 that I interviewed, 7 are employers who have convictions themselves, And I did think at one point that the two sets of data were going to have to be analysed completely separately because they would be completely different. But actually, there's very little difference in what the people without convictions are saying as opposed to the people with convictions concerning employing people with convictions. So the quotes that I'm using, I'm going to call her Poppy. She obviously has been in prison herself, is now in a position of, well, in a senior managerial position and responsible for employing people with convictions. And building on what Nicola said, and Poppy said this, is very important. Poppy said we need to be careful when we say we want to build or give hope to vulnerable people that we don't label them with another deficit. And then later on, she urges caution when speaking of people with convictions as vulnerable, because and somehow deserving of being treated differently or a special case within the workplace. What did come through very strongly from everyone I interviewed is that the urge, the need for people to feel equal in the workplace. If they've been employed, it's because they're the right person for the job, not because they've got convictions and it's a special case and they should be othered in the workplace. So that was a very strong point. So the literature demonstrates that employment is an essential component of successful re-entry to society because it builds social contracts and gives people with convictions a sense of belonging, acceptance, self-esteem, and hope. Hope that they can change their narrative, hope that they can become successful in their employment and progress, hope that they can support their families, hope that they can live an independent life, hope that they can be considered normal, functioning, tax-paying members of society. And the word normal came up quite a lot from employers speaking about their employees who had said to the employers, you know, I just want to be normal. I just want to be like everybody else. So what they want is what many of us take for granted. So paid employment gives people with convictions hope because they not only have the potential to achieve an income, but to also establish legitimate identity. Again, that's just been challenged with the collateral consequences, but in terms of in their heads, if they're in employment, they are being treated the same as anybody else. And Poppy says that an employment offer is symbolic acceptance that must talk to some deep psychological need for closure. She went on to say that the importance of her first pay packet cemented that sense of freedom and independence. And she talked about being able to buy her children shoes. And that was something that she was dreaming about, hoping for, thinking of while she was in prison. So research shows that employment leads to an increase in self-esteem in people with convictions, and regular interaction with people without convictions leads to an enhancement of social relationships, both in and out of the workplace, which many people with convictions may not have had previously. In my master's, I found that employment creates a sense of obligation, reciprocal trust, and an environment which encourages ambition where people with convictions can achieve their goals. This then results in positive implications for the employer. And this is all things that the employers have, that I've interviewed, have backed up. This is based on the literature. The positive implications for the employers are greater loyalty and commitment from people with convictions, gratitude, punctuality, enhanced performance, career progression, reliability, and a willingness to learn, among other things. Most of the participants in my research stated that they were getting employees who really want to do the job. therefore the higher productivity. Stable employment is often indicated as one of the best predictors of success and desistance. Research on social bonds shows that important life events like finding employment is a decisive factor in that desistance. The key elements supporting desistance are job stability, commitment to work, and mutual ties which bind employees and employers. People with convictions have stated that being given a job gives them the opportunity to hope for a new life trajectory. For many, the thought of being able to go to work without looking over their shoulders or wondering when the police will turn up has been transformational. As Poppy puts it, having a job, you can live. You're not on benefit. You can escape the cycles of poverty, and you can escape intergenerational cycles of poverty, which is the root cause of most offending through employment. It's important to note here that the quality of work is crucial. Having a good job rather than only the option of entry-level work is key to building self-esteem and a sense of belonging in the community. I mean, what hope is there for somebody coming out of prison if the only jobs they're offered are entry level? For some people, that's what they want, and that's all they want, and that's enough. But if that's the only choice for everyone, it's not enough. And demoralizing. Employment can bring hope for people with convictions by contributing to other aspects of their post-release success, including stronger family ties and reintegration into the community. So these social bonds are important, and the economic benefits are significant. There are fewer victims of crime. The cost of sending someone to prison, at the event I went to the other day, and I'm still trying to find out where this information came from, but it was suggested that including court, police and prison place costs for one person for 1 year total is around £250,000. So Poppy said that her family life was positively impacted by her getting a job because her kids felt elevated that she was in work. And she said, moving beyond feelings of shame and stigma as children of imprisoned parents to know that our mum is somebody. She also said visibility of people with convictions in work restores hope to the community that's affected by imprisonment. We are symbols of hope. We are visible, tangible symbols that life can become better after such an experience as imprisonment. So she says that those sustainable, successful employment conveys a positive message to those still inside. So by being an example, Nicola touched on that earlier, of being someone who's been through the prison system or has convictions and is successful in employment, you can then give hope to others in your situation. And in fact, a couple of the employers I interviewed have said that what is very successful for them in recruiting people with convictions is to go into prisons and run either get to know you days or recruitment drives, even interviews within the prison system. And often, if they've got people who have got convictions who are already employed by them, if they want to, they'll take that person in who can speak to them peer to peer and show, I was where you were sitting in this prison 6 months ago, and now, you know, I'm successfully employed. Poppy also said that being in prison, and so have many other people with convictions, it's given them the ability to maintain optimism and hope through hardship and challenges. Your life is part of resilience, related to determination, strengthened by hope and vision, being able to draw upon any successes you've had or witnessed in others. one successful example that some employers use, which can instill a sense of hope. Oh, I've just said that, sorry. That employer said there's hope and there is an opportunity. For hope to succeed, though, and again, I think Nicola's kind of touched on this, and this touches on the collateral consequences, is that basic inequalities must first be addressed. We must challenge structures which create disadvantage through practice development with social justice and activism. We must include people facing deep-rooted social inequity, such as people with convictions, and challenge unfair policy agendas. I hope that my co-produced transformative research confronting prejudice, discrimination, stigma, and stereotyping will challenge such embedded inequalities. On a positive note, there is some sense of hope at the moment due to the current recruitment crisis, which has caused a perfect storm. More employers are committed as well to being more purpose and values led, ethical and inclusive. Many employers are starting to realize there is a massive and untapped pool of talent out there in people with convictions. As Nicola touched on, I went to a training day, they called it, last week in London, and there were 95 employers. It was put on by Timpson, Gregg and Cook, who all are staunch advocates of employing people with convictions. It was an informational day for other employers who were all extremely positive and open. And what I've found and what my research is showing already, the key thing, as well as changing when convictions are spent and who can have a DBS check, because there's a lot of confusion about who you can ask, who you can't, when that's a problem, when it prevents employment, is education. We need to educate the public and employers about how to, who can, what is safe, how to put the risk assessments in place. There's very few people that you wouldn't be able to employ somewhere in some way. Obviously, there are exceptions. So because of this, employers are now having this perfect storm of Brexit and COVID and the massive lack of workforce in the UK. Employers are starting to look at other areas of people they previously wouldn't have acknowledged, including people with convictions. However, this needs to be looked at cautiously, because they can't suddenly jump in and say, I'm just going to employ loads of people with convictions. If what I have found in the research is it's extremely important to have all your systems in place as an employer, to have the knowledge, and most importantly, to have everybody in your company on board with what you're doing. That's not to say every employee will agree with what you're going to do, but if you as a company are turning to them and saying, we are going to do this, this is how we're going to do it. We're not going to tell you who's people with convictions, but we're doing it for these reasons and it's a good thing. It's important to listen to anyone who has concerns, but they need to know why you're doing it and that that is what you are going to do. In my experience working in prisons, those without hope, dreams and aspirations are the ones who keep returning. Thank you.
Thank you both for your excellent presentations. I felt that the ordering of your presentations was brilliant, and how you moved away from, I suppose, the individual to the employer perspective. So thank you for organising it that way. I'm just conscious of time, and I've got lots and lots of questions, and I can contact you separately. But we do have some comments from the audience. you've certainly helped me frame this much better in my own mind. And I think, Nicola, how you set out what your working group has done, and the structural issues, which, you know, is very vivid, and we all are aware of those, but kind of consolidating that for the benefit of us is really helpful, and also around identity and stigma and the impacts there. So thank you for shaping that, and also the quotes that you've both drawn on as well, how that it brings this topic alive, and as you've both helpfully done, is kind of labour the point about hope and its role within this discussion, and Justin, how you ended your point there, without hope it's a challenge, right? So I'll go to the questions from, or comments. I think they're mostly comments, actually, guys. So you might want to speak to those. First of all, Andrew, thank you for posting this. And it's a question around the role of rehabilitative agendas and or interventions, should I say. And I'll go to your second comment, Andrew. You said, to put it another way, it seems incongruous to work towards rehabilitation when law, policy, practice does not then treat people as full citizens once rehabilitative interventions are complete. I think that comes back to your list, Nicola, on those structural barriers that are in place. Is there anything more you want to say in comment to that, guys?
Just for me, that I'd completely agree, because if we are going to equip people with all these kind of skills and attributes, and they are then going to become rehabilitated, but then the playing field that they're actually then engaging with isn't fair, isn't proportionate, then actually what are we equipping them for? Because if we're going to rehabilitate people back to a degree of citizenship rather than full citizenship, well, then are we not accepting that we're failing them in some ways? Perhaps would be what I would say. So I'd completely agree with that. And I think it calls for us to kind of take a more holistic approach, because rehabilitation, I think, is often seen as quite separate. But what are we actually rehabilitating people to? And then what is the playing field like for them to go on and be agentic, autonomous individuals with hope and control?
Yeah. Justin, have you got anything to add there about I suppose the criminal justice, once the criminal justice system has treated the individual, let's say, and then away you go, get on with your life.
Except that it's not that. That's what it should be. And when I worked in prisons, the first thing that you're taught when you go to work in a prison is, we are not here to judge, we are not here to punish. Their punishment is their loss of liberty and their sentence. Now, once that sentence is served, that should be it. They are supposedly rehabilitated, although in a lot of cases they weren't habilitated in the first place. So there's a further issue with that. But as one person said to me a long time ago when I worked in prison, when do I stop being an ex-offender? That's why we don't use that term anymore, because it focuses on the crime, the criminality, the sentence, the prison, not, when even I don't like having to use the term people with convictions, but I have to, because of, I am talking about a group of people. But it is this fact, and it's mostly, it's an issue within the media of how we portray people that have had any kind of brush with the criminal justice system. However, there's 11 million people in this country who've got a record more serious than a driving offence. That's a sixth of the population. We can't ignore that many people.
Mm.
We need to readjust how we think about people that have served their time, and
I think this kind of when will it end question definitely came up in the interviews that I conducted with people. And what we found, what I found is they'd start talking and then they'd almost count on their fingers. I've done this, I've done that. I've worked in a school. I've kind of been trusted with this. It's been this many years, and they list all these reasons why essentially they're a good person. And then they say, but then my criminal record is there that says something different, and that's what I keep being judged on. And so somebody who I spoke to had possession of cannabis in her early 20s, and I interviewed her when she was in her early 60s, and she'd just had to go and have an interview at the embassy in London because she was trying to get a visa to go to America. And she said, I'm still on trial. After all this time, I'm still back on trial again. And I mean, when we go back to Andrew's question on rehabilitation, it's like, well, is that individual not rehabilitated? So then why are they treated? It's complicated for people.
And your example, Justin, of Poppy, who was in the criminal justice system, who is now employing others and providing, as you say, and not dependent on the state anymore, and is living, that view of what rehabilitation. But there's a lot of talk around desistance, isn't there? And when I was listening to both of your presentations, it was very strong how we still latched on to a rehabilitation, and that's clearly part of the process. But this idea of desistance, and Poppy is an example, an excellent example of that desistance model. You touched on activism, and I think this relates to both Alexandra Kimmons's comment about the fair checks and asking for a review of criminal records, and also Celebrate Our Similarities, who've produced good practice examples that they want to share with communities. So about that public engagement. That links to perhaps that event that you went to, Justin, about, promoting, that companies do this, and this is how we do it. We need more employers to adopt these fair practices. In terms of activism, then, how does that, in terms of the networks, you're clearly engaged with this network. How is activism playing out in this field? And I think then that relates to a comment by Rob Canton about the resistance to giving people with convictions fair opportunities. Any thoughts on that, guys?
I'll just very quickly say that activism does work. In the recent changes that we've had to rehabilitation of offenders and filtering came through charities like Unlock putting together an evidence base to say there are a lot of people who are disproportionately affected by this. And there was a Supreme Court ruling that people can look up if they're interested in that. So we do know there's a place for it. There's an appetite for it. People are talking about this. But I think for me, it's that there's no point us all talking to each other because we do that anyway. But it's about talking to
an echo chamber.
Exactly that. Yeah. And so, Justin, I don't know whether you want to come in here again, but I think going to events where you can actually reach different people and have conversations with people who are not aware of all these structural issues and the stigma, and are not aware of say the kind of the fair checks campaign and ban the box and Unlock, people who are just not aware and not part of the conversation. It's dragging them in and getting them engaged.
Yeah, and on that as well, to add to it, Joe Garahy and Andrew both talked about, employers, are you employing as part of corporate social responsibility, as the right thing to do, as a so I'll address that first. I had a whole section written about corporate social responsibility, expecting that to be a really large thing coming through from the employers, and one employer said it was part of their corporate social responsibility very proudly. A lot of employers are moving away from that term now, and it is about social values. And so a value is obviously different to a responsibility. It's not placed upon them, it's because they want to do it. All of the employers I spoke to certainly said that it was coming from a place of wanting to do the right thing and seeing that this could be useful and beneficial. Yes, there was one transcript that I had that when my co-researchers read through, they brought something to me, which was why this is so invaluable having them. This employer is saying, oh, we did this for them and we did that for them, and we take them here and we show them there. And they felt that that was quite kind of, you know, holding someone up as a poster boy or girl. Again, I tried to touch on that in what I was saying, that if you want to take someone who has convictions into prison, it has to be because they want to do it and for the right reasons, not to make you as an organization look good. And there are certain organizations out there, yes, that are very well known, that employ people with convictions and are very vocal about it. And I see both sides of the argument that have been put to me, that that's a great thing because it's opening up to lots of other employers who are smaller, less well known, to think about that. But also, I have heard people say, oh God, they're always banging on about employing ex-offenders, and you know, that it's a little bit self-serving.
Yeah.
If people are getting jobs that wouldn't get, and if that's opening up other people's minds to employing people with convictions, as long as nobody's getting, you know, used in the process, it's a difficult one to land hard on either side. I think the same with the fair checks. I mean, obviously I'm part of that, and like, for instance, LA brought in that that's a statewide, or is it a state? No, area-wide, citywide policy of you know, removing the tick box on application and ban the box, what we have here, part of that. Great. Now again, also people have brought to me that it's all well and good removing that tick box, but then sometimes if someone's gone 2 or 3 stages down the recruitment process and it's not been mentioned at all, that then they still get the knockback at that point. And I have even heard now that some employers are using alternative methods to filter people out. And that might be looking at an application form and thinking, right, this is a young black male from a poor area in London. He's much more likely, in their heads, this is what they think, to have had a brush with the criminal justice system. Therefore, I will exclude him on that basis. So he might not even have a conviction at all. So other more unfair systems could come into place.
Yeah. I'd love to carry on chatting, guys, but we've run out of time. And there's been some lovely comments and sort of, you know, based on both of your presentations, and I really appreciate how both of you have excellently dissected hope and reflected on that, and I hope that's given you some food for thought for your own journeys in your own thinking. I'd like to thank you both on behalf of myself and the audience today for highlighting the impact that convictions has on people's everyday lives, right, and how that transpires for many years and the stigma that it attached. But clearly there is some good work happening out there, and I think the message today is around addressing policy and practice and responses and public engagement, right, and public education. So thank you both very much. I hope you both enjoyed yourselves today, and we can carry on this conversation. I'd love to have another chat with you guys and see what happens next, so do keep me posted. We'll be doing another event, so we'll be launching those for the new year. We've got some more sessions on hope lined up for 2023. Wishing you all a peaceful Christmas, bit of downtime for some of us, not all of us, and thanks again everyone for joining us. We hope to see you back here, and if you've got any questions, do send them in to us and I'll make sure that Nicola and Justin are sent them. Thank you everyone. Thank you. Celebrate our similarities. Love the idea of bringing hope. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you.